Welcome to Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always by my dear friend and co-host, Jacob McQuire. This is our first preview show as we're doing now 2 podcasts throughout the week, and we will have a lot to break down for you all in regards to the Panthers-Giants game in Germany this week. But before we get to that, we had a big signing happening today. Chuba Hubbard got extended, rightfully so. I think it was around a $33 million deal. About $15 million of it was guaranteed. Did you think this was the right signing, the right investment, especially when we just signed Miles Sanders last offseason? And by last offseason, I mean the 2023 offseason, and then just drafted Jonathan Brooks with the second-round pick after moving back up with the Colts this past draft.
Yeah, I actually like the extension. You know, a lot of people on Twitter, on social media are going to criticize it. Number one, because we're the Panthers, right? So anything the Panthers do has to be bad. And number two, the recent wave, I guess, of running backs not mattering, I think is still stuck in people's minds. But something you have to take into account this season, rushing offenses are some of the more successful offenses in the league. The return of the cover 2 defense, making all these young QBs have mistakes and stuff, has let a lot of teams lean on the run game. And I think that with Miles Sanders having an out in his contract this upcoming offseason, and Chuba Hubbard not only being 5th in the league in rushing, but being like the engine that drives our offense, he's been a leader the past couple of years. You think of how he improved from his rookie year where he was like unplayable to where he is now one of the best backs in the league. He said he wants to be here and change the culture. These are the kind of players you reward. You and I have talked extensively about how, the Panthers trade away McCaffrey, DJ Moore, Brian Burns in back-to-back-to-back years. And while Chuba wasn't a first-round pick, he is a homegrown talent and a good player. And it feels good to try to retain some of these guys, especially when you're trying to rebuild your culture around being a hard-nosed football team. I couldn't think of a better person to get the extension. And as far as like the actual money goes, that's not that bad to me. I think it's like 9th overall or tied for 9th and highest paid running backs. And it's like a high step down from the top guys looking at like McCaffrey. McCaffrey's making $19 million a year. Chuba's going to be making a little over 8. So I'm not super concerned with the amount of money. And I think it's a good investment, even with the Jonathan Brooks pick, because we might have double trouble 2.0 here in a couple of years. I know he is activated onto the 53-man roster now, so maybe we'll see a little bit of him in Germany this week. I doubt it, though, because, you know, those soccer fields are a bit different over in Europe. They're a lot slicker. But I think it's going to be a fun running back tandem for years to come. And the last point I'll make is when we have such quarterback uncertainty, whether it's Bryce, whether it's Andy Dalton, or whomever it might be next season, don't you think it's a good idea to have 2 strong running backs in the backfield that can take some pressure off of them?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Having a running back tandem that has the ability to have that thunder and lightning punch. You have Detroit that has David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, and they've kind of coined their nickname to be Sonic and Knuckles. And back in the day, D'Angelo Williams, Jonathan Stewart, that was double trouble. And while I don't think Chuba Hubbard is necessarily on D'Angelo Williams' level in terms of skill or production, even when you look back to some of those earlier years, I do think he is a really good running back, and he has paved a name for himself, a role in this offense behind the offensive line that was built this past offseason. So definitely paying dividends. I think the $8 million range is perfectly fine, especially when, like you said, Miles Sanders, he's going to be a cut candidate this coming offseason. It goes back to the fact that I think the biggest mistake was taking Jonathan Brooks in the second. He hasn't been an immediate impact player. We could have grabbed somebody from like an interior offensive lineman standpoint, so we didn't have to sign necessarily Damian Lewis, or we'd have somebody to kind of fill in for Austin Corbett since he's gone down as our center this year. And could have found a running back a little bit later in the draft. We're going up against the Giants this week, and the rookie running back leader right now is actually Tyrone Tracy, who was a day 3 pick. Bucky Irving has looked phenomenal in Tampa Bay. Again, a more finesse back, somebody that's more like Chuba, not necessarily a bruiser, but guys like Ray Davis, Braylon Allen have looked good. And again, day 3 picks. So I think it was just using a pick that could have been used on a position of need or having a guy that could have been a day one impact player for a team that was coming off a 2-15 season should have been the thought process behind there. But I am excited to see this duo play. It's one of those things that could lead to a what if down the road.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess the thing I would say to kind of challenge that or in regards to that is Jonathan Brooks was superior to all those guys by a country mile in college. And if he comes back healthy, I think he'll be able to display a much higher level of skill than a lot of those guys already. And at his size, he's not like Braylon Allen, who's like a fullback, but Jonathan Brooks is a big running back and he has the pass catching ability and one cut stop and go ability. So I think it'll be interesting. I'm not saying we shouldn't have taken somebody like an edge rusher or a defensive lineman or something, especially looking at how barren our room is now. We'll have to see. But I think that's kind of a good segue into the game this week because one of the reasons our defensive line room is kind of barren is that we traded away Brian Burns to the New York Giants. And he's had a really good year this year. Well, let me say, he's been kind of hit or miss. That's how he's been throughout his career. But his hits this year, I think, have been a lot bigger from a pressure standpoint. And that's still something that the Panthers are missing. And I know you marked it down here that he said he doesn't have any no comment about a revenge game or something like that. It always means something, right? Like we saw Malik Willis early this year starting against the Titans, getting the win. And he said there's no extra emotion or anything. It's just a win. I think there is, especially in Burns's case, when we kind of strung him along, led him along for so long and spurned him in the end, not giving him the contract he wanted. So I think he's going to be going after Bryce quite a bit on Sunday.
Oh, absolutely. And it's a perfect segue from Chuba Hubbard's extension because where everybody's talking about this dynamic duo in our backfield, we, in essence, when we traded Burns away for pick 39, we turned that into the Rams' future second round pick that we'll see come to fruition this next offseason. And we then moved up to grab Jonathan Brooks. So at this point, when you look at kind of Brian Burns' value, he's 10th or tied for 10th in pressures this year, according to FTN. And he has the 5th fastest average time to a pressure, also according to FTN. So this is a guy that showed exactly what he did in Carolina. He's a speed rusher. He can get around the edge very quickly, and he can change the dynamics of the game because of that. And so it will be very interesting to see going up against his former team and a former friend, because there were countless videos of Bryce Young and Brian Burns jawing at each other last offseason. And there was a bit of camaraderie between the two. So I think Burns definitely wants to get his lick back and show what he's worth. And this is one of those games that I wouldn't be surprised if he gets 3 sacks, especially with Icky kind of coming back from an injury and just some questions along the offensive health.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure about 3 sacks. I know the Giants are leading the league or are close to it in sacks. Bryce has only taken 3 total sacks since he's become the starter again. I think he's doing a lot better job of moving around the pocket and stuff like that. And he already faced quite a difficult front in the Broncos. Now, the Broncos didn't have a Dexter Lawrence, who is a complete game wrecker from that nose tackle position. So that's going to be a huge kind of matchup that I'm going to be watching, our interior versus Dexter Lawrence.
He still leads the NFL in sacks, I think, at like 9 right now, which is insane.
It is crazy, but the one thing I will be happy about is while he is a nose tackle, he's primarily going to line up over center. We have 2 like bouncers in Damian Lewis and Robert Hunt that can kind of help double team or chip him on rushes and give Cade Mays or whoever's playing center in this game some help. A couple of optics that I want to look at. Number one, this is going to be in Germany, right? We've stressed that all week, and there's not really a home field advantage for these European games. You're going to see people with all kinds of jerseys in the stands. Dave Canales even said it in yesterday's press conference because he was, I think, in 2022 or 23 last year, excuse me, when he was on the Buccaneers. Or no, excuse me, it was 2 years ago because they played the Buccaneers in Seattle. He was talking about is the first Germany game, how you would see people in Cam Newton jerseys, you would see Walter Payton jerseys, you'd see all kinds of jerseys over with those European fans. They're fans of like the game of NFL football. So there's not really going to be a home field advantage. And then with that in mind, Daniel Jones, like we've seen how bad he can be, particularly at MetLife Stadium. but he is on the road. So where I think he's a little bit better, there's not as much pressure in front of the home crowd. So I think his running ability is something we are going to have to contain. And the last time, like I think back to when we faced more of a mobile quarterback was Washington, and that didn't really go well. But again, we didn't have Clowney in that game. We didn't have Ashawn Robinson. So our front might be a little bit healthier. Josie Jewell, I think, was also out in that game. So Daniel Jones's rushing ability is something else I want to look at in this game.
Well, we can talk about Daniel Jones a little bit more in depth here. On the screen, for those of you who are watching on YouTube, catchable passes thrown to different regions of the field. Daniel Jones is a fairly accurate thrower when it comes to that, like 0 to, I want to say 20-yard mark, those like short to intermediate throws. And when you have guys in terms of the wide receiver room that they have, and Malik Neighbors and Wandale Robinson, I'm blanking out on guys. They just drafted a tight end in Theo Johnson, who's been productive, scored his first touchdown last week. There's a lot there to where they're playing against one of the worst defenses. When you look at how Carolina does in most coverages, we're below the 50th percentile. And so this is a game where, just like we made Bo Nix look like a Pro Bowl quarterback, Daniel Jones, even though he has shown a lot of coming off his injury and just a lot of those knucklehead plays that has made Will Levis a meme in a lot of games this year. Those are the kind of situations where I think Daniel Jones, why he has those, they aren't necessarily going to show up this game because, again, I don't know if we're going to be able to generate a lot of pressure. And because we can't stop the run, I think it puts that much more stress on the secondary to then stop those throws that Dable is going to scheme up to the playmakers and the guys that have that big yak ability.
I think that's a good point. And I look back to this past week versus the Saints receivers. And granted, after Olave went out, they didn't have much of anybody in terms of a big name at receiver or a big impact. But both J.C. Horn and Mike Jackson, zero receptions, when they were the closest defender. If they can have even close to a performance like that, I think it'll be a good example of having to force the Giants to run the ball, which I think is actually their strength. So we'll have to be more prepared for that. I was watching the Giants and Commanders game from last week, and they didn't have much of any air production in the first half, and then kind of had to force it late in the game because they weren't getting anywhere running either. I think we might see a script like that where early in the game, not a lot of firepower on both sides, but then late in the game, we're going to be pushing the ball downfield a good bit more. And I think that with Bryce late in the game this past week, getting those downfield shots to Leggett, the one to Jatavian Sanders, I think that's going to be more in the game plan for the Panthers as well.
Yeah. And we haven't addressed the elephant in the room since we last recorded on Tuesday, but Bryce Young was named the starting quarterback. Mm-hmm. We assumed he would be on Tuesday. And what's interesting, again, for those of you watching on YouTube, there's a graph that shows the cumulative efficiency throughout the year for both Bryce Young and Andy Dalton. And they're both towards the bottom of the league. They both haven't been impressive. There's been a major drop-off from Dalton over the past 2 games, and that drop is very concerning, especially when you look at Bryce and you see him kind of hovering around 0 over the past 2 games. He hasn't necessarily been horrific, but he hasn't been great either. And going up against the Giants defense, I think what'll be interesting to see is that they are one of the best defenses when deploying cover 1, when they can go mano-mano. And honest to goodness, Xavier Leggett outside of the red zone, he does struggle to separate. And I'm going to be very interested to see if he can win against man coverage in this game, because the Giants, not only do they run it on 43% of their dropbacks that they cover, they have a 85th percentile in EPA when they play cover 1. So that's concerning for me, because this is a game where Bryce is going to have these one-on-one opportunities. It's a matter of whether or not his receivers can get open. I think that's going to be more the storyline, is can we see Xavier Leggett take a step? Can he be productive all the way down the field? Can Jalen Coker continue his rise and ascension as a wide receiver? Are we going to see more from Jatavian Sanders? Can David Moore be that solid, reliable target in situational football downs on your critical third downs? Like that's that's what I'm looking for in this game, because right now, the way I see the script playing out, I don't see how we're going to stop their offense when they have the ability to run the football and they have people that are going to force us to cover deep. We're going to have to bracket a guy like Malik Neighbors. I wouldn't personally trust him one-on-one on JC Horn. For me, I think that's a situation where Brian Dable would tell Daniel Jones, always take that matchup unless Horn has the leverage.
I'm not going to disrespect JC Horn like that. I think he could cover the rookie pretty well there. You brought up man coverage and how often that they deploy it. It's good that you bring that up because Bryce's strength in both the Saints game and the Broncos game was actually against man coverage. That's when he was at his best. I remember in the Broncos game, both of his touchdowns came in man coverage. He was like 7 for 8 for 100-something yards in that game. I don't have the numbers for the Saints game, but man coverage also allows the Panthers or seeds the Panthers an advantage, I think, like against a leaky secondary like the Giants have, especially when we have players that are supersized like Jatavian Sanders, like Xavier Legette. This play here is obviously the big one for Sanders where he hurdles the guy and trucks the guy running down the field. And even though the Saints had secondary injuries in this game to two of their starting corners, their secondary is probably comparable to the Giants secondary. It's been very bad for the Giants this year. Deonte Banks, who was a first-round pick corner for them 2 drafts ago, has been exposed in the end zone quite a bit, and that's like exactly where Xavier Legette thrives. You know, he has 4 touchdowns, tied for second among all rookies. So I think in terms of, I think you're right. When you said the receivers are going to have to make the play and help Bryce when he puts the ball on him, I think that's what it's going to come down to. But I think I can trust the size and strength of our receivers in those situations, particularly in the red zone and in the end zone, should we move the ball down the field.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we get into the red zone, the way we've been able to scheme up Xavier Legette has been phenomenal. He's had a lot of good one-on-one opportunities where he can just go high point the ball and really just box out. And that's been great to see. I'm more saying along the lines of, if the Giants aren't going to be stopped on offense, we got to go like point for point with them, drive for drive. That's where it becomes a little bit more concerning, because I don't know how well our running game with Chuba and Miles Sanders is necessarily going to perform against the Giants. I don't think a lot of our inside runs are going to be effective, and that's going to really, I think, force a lot more outside zone or maybe even power concepts to lean in against this Giants defensive line that really doesn't allow more than 5 yards of carry. So it's one of those things. We have a running back that is doing really, really well, has been very productive. Is he going to have that same kind of production? And if he's stymied, that puts a lot more pressure on Bryce Young and these young wide receivers that are now in starting roles.
Yeah, I'm with you. And there's like a clear reason, right, why inside runs don't really work against the Giants. You're running right into Dexter Lawrence, and he's a game wrecker from a pass perspective and a run defense perspective. However, Brian Burns has not been a great run stopper in his career in Carolina. Kayvon Thibodeau is known to miss on a play or two. And I think with Jonathan Brooks, I don't think he'll play more than like 5 or 10 snaps. But I think if you can run some 21 and have one of those guys be a blocker on the outside, you can get the advantage on some of those outside runs. It's just going to come down to, is Dave Canales and the run game coordinator willing to deviate from the inside run where Chuba Hubbard is so successful and go to somebody like Sanders or Brooks, who has that cut ability and can get to the outside quickly. I think that's going to be pivotal for the offense to move the ball down the field, because other than those inside runs, I think we can run on the Giants because, again, weaker secondary leads to broken tackles on the outside.
Yeah. And as we talk about kind of this matchup against the Giants defense, looking at just man coverage rates in terms of early downs, we're a little bit above average when we call man coverage. The Giants are a little bit below average. And then when it looks at like late down kind of calls, the Giants are around league average and the Panthers are a little bit below. So Evero's probably going to throw some man coverage early and often, try to load the box a little bit more, stop the run. And then on later downs, play some zone coverage when you're expecting a pass from the offense. And Giants are kind of just hovering there around league average. They play zone pretty frequently on early downs, and they play man more frequently on later downs. So I don't think Shane Bowen's going to necessarily go away from that. I would be curious to see if, since Icky was out, if they decide to do blitz packages where they send an extra rusher on that side. Shane Bowen's not known to necessarily blitz, but knowing that this could be a weak spot on the offensive line with a guy coming back from injury, that is where I would target, especially on dropbacks from Bryce Young.
Yeah, and we saw that in the game against Washington last week. Isaiah Simmons, the former Clemson linebacker, 8th overall pick, went one after Derek Brown. He's on the Giants now, and they would line him up on third and like 5 or greater, so like third and longs. They would line him up over the Washington center because Washington's interior O-line has some issues, and as a blitzer, he was able to get in the backfield. But obviously, Jaden Daniels is a different runner per se than Bryce Young, a little bit quicker, and he was able to get out of a lot of those scenarios. One thing I've seen from Bryce over the past couple of weeks is avoiding sacks and getting outside of the pocket. He's done a pretty good job with. I think he's going to have to do that in this game, especially with Dexter Lawrence, Thibodeau, Brian Burns. If they bring Simmons or their other Bobby Okereke, who's a good linebacker for them, if they can bring some of those guys on blitzes, it's going to have to make some stuff happen outside of the pocket. And I think we saw some of that in the game against the Saints, like the throw to Leggett where it was the interception, quote unquote. It was a move where he got outside of the pocket and went downfield to him. I think Canales has done a good job moving the pocket over the past couple weeks to let Bryce see down the field better and have those opportunities. So I think that's going to be key in this game. I don't know any other real matchups I wanted to discuss regarding this game.
I think the only thing I would want to touch on, and we've kind of already talked about it, but just the Giants run game against the Panthers run defense, and anything outside zone, power, other runs outside of man, duo, and inside zone. The Panthers are allowing like 5 or more yards. And so I could see the Giants leaning into a more power heavy set, especially with Daniel Bellinger and now Theo Johnson, where you can get bigger and just bully the Panthers up front. And that may be a game plan for them. I don't know how much they trust their offensive line and pass pro with Andrew Thomas out. So leaning on Tyron Tracy, leaning on Devin Singletary could be the move for them with a team that allows running backs to run all over them. I mean, Alvin Kamara just went for 150 yards when the Saints didn't have any of their top wide receivers on the field. And that's a little bit concerning for me because that's something that you're expecting as a team and you're not stopping it. And so in a situation against a good play caller in Brian Dable, I think he's going to be able to take advantage of some of those mismatches and capitalize.
For sure. We might see a couple of like 3 running backs with 50 or more yards in this game. I think that is going to be the script, is going to be run heavy. The Giants also have a poor run defense overall. I think I saw today it was like 26th or something total in yards, total rushing yards allowed per game. So that'll be a key for us as well. I don't know if we want to make predictions for the game or not. I think we're in alignment with who we think is going to win. Maybe we can save that for Sunday when you put the graphic out. But I think it'll be an interesting game. Let me say, I don't think it's going to be a good game. Like the Saints game, it was a good game because it was low score, or not low score. It was a close scoring game throughout the game, and the defense made plays, but it wasn't super flashy or anything. I don't think it's going to be the game tonight where we see 2 bad defenses and 2 really good offenses, But it'll be interesting to say the least, because at least, hey, even if we lose, Panthers wearing the black helmets and the blue jerseys, so at least we'll look good doing it.
Yeah. The biggest thing I'll point out is the Panthers defense haven't been able to hold anybody underneath 20 points this year. And all of our losses, we've lost by 10 or more. And so when we've been able to eke out wins against the Raiders, the Saints, it's been because we have some offensive output. And so if we're stymied early in the game, I think this is a situation where the Giants could run away with it and just be in control the whole time, as long as they're able to move the ball and not get in their own way. Because I don't, even if we have DJ Wanham, Jadeveon Clowney, those guys on the defensive line, I don't know if that's going to be enough to really move the tide and force them into mistakes and turnovers. I mean, we allowed the Saints last week to go for over 450 yards, and we didn't force a single turnover. Those are the kind of things that are concerning, especially when you're trying to keep games close and put your offense in a position where they can go win it for you.
For sure. I think you said the key point right there. Allow them to, they can't make mistakes, right? You know who's really good at making mistakes when he's in the pocket? Daniel Jones. So with that in mind, and you brought up DJ Wanham possibly coming back for this game. I don't think we know his status yet. We know that Jonathan Brooks and Jaden Crumedy are 6th-round defensive lineman draft pick. Both of those guys are activated, but we don't know if they'll play because they haven't played all year. And again, it's in Germany on a soccer field. But those guys, maybe Thielen comes back, maybe Wanham comes back. I think that's going to be imperative. But you look at the recent trades we've done, right? Get rid of Deontay Johnson. We get rid of Mingo, and Mingo's still a young guy, but we have younger guys at the position now. And then with a guy like Brooks maybe supplanting Miles Sanders, we're getting a bit younger across the board, especially on offense. Again, Jatavian Sanders, Coker, and Leggett are our top 3 receivers in terms of yardage, all top 11 for rookie receiving yardage. But I think that's a good segue into this year's draft class, because while we did win last week, which takes us out of the number 1 pick. Looking at Tankathon, we have the 4th overall pick currently. I think we can both agree it's going to be somewhere in the top 10 to end the season. And it's important because we've all talked about Travis Hunter, right? Is he the best talent? Shador Sanders, Cam Ward, really good quarterbacks, right? Are we going to take a quarterback? I don't know. I don't think we should, because there's so many other holes on the team. There are important games this week. Like Alabama, LSU being the big one, but there are important players across the league that I think we need to pay attention to as Panthers fans, because we know the weaknesses on this roster, right? It's going to be the defense, particularly the defensive line. And I've talked about him a little bit on this podcast before, but Mason Graham, the defensive tackle for Michigan, he has a bye week this week. But if you go back and watch any of his film, he's just a game wrecker, especially from a pass rush perspective. And he does play with a good run stopper in Kenneth Grant, but you know who else is a good run stopper? The Carolina Panthers, when Derek Brown is on the field. So I really like that pairing there. 2 top 10 defensive tackle picks to kind of pave the way for the defensive line. What's kind of your grip on what position would you go? Should we stay in that top 5 to 8 pick range like we're probably projected to?
So we want to talk about dynamic duos and Chuba Hubbard and Jonathan Brooks being like a D'Angelo Williams or Jonathan Stewart. Why not bring it back to some of these core defenses that led the Panthers franchises to Super Bowls? And so you had back in the day guys like Chris Jenkins. I think Mike Rucker was an edge rusher, but just a good defensive line, good interior presence. And then you fast forward to the 2015 run, and it really started back when Dave Gettleman took over as GM back in 2013, and he went Starla Lutulele in the first and K'Wan Short in the second round. And he got his run stuffer in the first and his pass rusher in the second round, and it worked out. Those two were phenomenal at being able to complement each other's strengths. And I think in this case, what you're pointing out would be phenomenal. The next thing is finding an edge rusher, whether that's trading for another veteran to kind of pair with Jadeveon Clowney and then drafting a guy or two in the later rounds. That really then becomes the focus on fixing the defensive line. But from an interior standpoint, that would be phenomenal. And it would automatically turn a weakness this year into a strength going into next.
Yeah, like I'm with you. It has to be like in terms of priority positions on our defensive line is number 1 for me. You could say edge rusher too, but if you can't get interior pressure, like over edge pressure, like there's just nothing you can do, right? Travis Hunter, I think, is a really special talent at corner, but we do have JC Horn, and I think playing like a weak link system in the secondary can be successful. But edge rusher, yeah, I think it's got to be number 2. We talked about Nick Scorton with Texas A&M, but the guy I really want to highlight is Abdul Carter, the Penn State edge rusher. He had himself a game versus Ohio State last week, which I think is huge because that's their first big matchup every year. And every year you kind of see the standout player from the Penn State team. What can they do? Micah Parsons also showing in that game when they played 4 or 5 years ago now. But he did work, Abdul Carter, that is, on the Ohio State left tackle who used to be their left guard but had to move in because their left tackle had a season-ending injury. But he was wreaking havoc in the backfield. And I think that's a good guy to build an edge rusher room around should we end up going that route in the draft, because we do need edge rushers as well. But I would stick to the interior like Dave Gettleman did back in the day.
Yeah, no, it just allows you to do so many other things on the defense when you can shore up the interior and not get gashed. Because if you're just getting run down like right through the middle, it just opens everything else up because now you got to bring linebackers inside and their spacing to the outside just opens windows up in the passing game. And it just becomes a whole nightmare. And you can prevent that by simply drafting a guy in the top 5 who is phenomenal at what he does. Outside of Travis Hunter, I don't really see a reason why we wouldn't take Mason Graham, just unless we're like say at pick 4 or 5 and he goes 3. At that point, then you start looking maybe at an edge that's on your board really, really high. So we'll get more into draft strategies and talk about big boards as we approach the draft, and we know kind of where the Panthers are actually going to pick. It's very murky because the bottom of the league in terms of just how bad teams are, there's so many teams that are like at 2 wins right now. And so that kind of muddies the water to kind of really figure out where Carolina is going to land. But from a talent standpoint, from a production standpoint, I think the Panthers will definitely have a top 5 pick. That kind of leads into a couple games we want to highlight before we get out of here with our perfect takes and our first perfect parlay. But those matchups are going to feature 2 rookies, the first overall pick against the 3rd overall pick. So Caleb Williams and Drake May. We talked about in the offseason, Drake May was our quarterback 1, followed shortly by Caleb Williams. And Drake May's shown a lot in the past few games he's played. Caleb Williams, with about half a year in, has not really proven to be the player he was sold to be. It's actually pretty alarming when you look at a lot of advanced statistics and you not only see Jaden Daniels and Drake May doing better than Caleb Williams, but also Bo Nix out in Denver. That's just not a good look. And it's not a good look on Caleb. It's not a good look on the Bears and their organization. And so it will be very interesting to see if they can right the ship against a bad New England team.
Yeah, and you talk about how Williams has performed in relation to the other rookie quarterbacks. A graphic you put out, I think it was either yesterday or Tuesday, it was like the create rate, how QBs do outside of structure. Caleb Williams was behind Bryce Young and like over his past 2 games. And so when you have somebody who was a historically or had a historically bad rookie year doing better at a create thing, which was one of Caleb's superpowers coming out of the draft, I think it is concerning, especially when Williams does have the weapons necessary to make it happen. So I think this is a good game for them to right the ship, right? While I do think Drake May has, in the time he's been on the field, outperformed Caleb, he doesn't have the support or the firepower to, number one, really dominate a strong Bears defense, and number 2, just keep up with the Chicago offense that when Shane Waldron is locked in, when Caleb Williams is locked in, they can score some points. We saw what they did to the Panthers, another team with a poor defense. So I'm really looking forward to that QB battle. There's some numbers with Drake May since he's been the starter: 6 passing touchdowns, 1 rushing touchdown, and 4 interceptions. So a little volatile, but he can make the plays. When we did our QB draft stuff in the offseason last year, Josh Allen was a name that kind of came up when you look at Drake May, Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, in terms of arm strength and what they can do with the legs. Even though he's not really a super runner like Jaden Daniels is, he can move it a little bit. So looking forward to seeing what he can do versus a strong defense. The other game that we wanted to talk about features the number 2 overall pick, the presumed rookie of the offensive rookie of the year, dark horse MVP candidate, question mark, Jaden Daniels, going up against a, let's just say, a not MVP candidate QB, but someone who's playing better than he did last year for sure, and Russell Wilson and the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are coming off their bye week, so they have some rest. I think Washington's still the number 1 offense in EPA. If not, like, I don't know if the Lions have caught him yet, but really good offense versus a stout Pittsburgh defense that got better after the trade deadline.
Absolutely. And you brought up the create rate, which is pretty much just plays out of structure when the quarterback leaves the pocket due to pressure, just bailing out of it. And Russell Wilson, interestingly enough, he has the highest create rate percentage, but he has one of the lowest efficiencies in the league. So that whole let Russ cook movement, he's not really able to cook. He operates a lot better in structure, just hitting that first read, throwing those beautiful moon balls he throws down the sidelines to allow his wide receiver to make a play or draw a pass interference call. And that's the element, the explosive element that Russell Wilson brings to the table. The create rate, and I know I keep going back to this, but where Drake May was up by Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels was up by Lamar Jackson. So two guys they were comp to coming out of the draft who already play at an MVP level. They're showing the ability to make some of those plays that they were comp to. And what's interesting is Caleb Williams was comped to Patrick Mahomes, who is also in that top right quadrant. And unfortunately, he's nowhere near him. And I think it just needs to come to the point now that when NFL evaluators in the draft process go, oh, he plays like Mahomes, probably stay away from that. And the reason I say that is what Mahomes does, why it looks like magic and sorcery. He knows where he's scrambling. Everything, for the most part, is very designed and scripted. He knows if he's rolling out here, who his outlets are, if he needs to scramble. We're not seeing that in Caleb Williams' game. And I think a lot of times when you go back and you even look at the USC tape, he just kind of danced around until he found an open guy. There wasn't really a thought process or methodology that when I roll out here, I'm looking for this target. And that's become very apparent at the next level.
For sure. I've always been like anti-ceiling comp for draft picks, even though like we're spoiled because Daniels and May are approaching or living up to those early ceilings. I think we should just stay away from, because it's hard to do that, right? Like Stroud was considered like a really good top 5 rookie ever, and now look at what Jaden Daniels is doing. The ceiling is just even higher. So stay away from ceiling comps, I guess, is my takeaway from that. But we're getting into perfect takes territory. And on Tuesday, you alluded to how it might be a little bit different. And I think you've come up with a pretty cool idea for our Thursday show, considering we have a game today, an NFL game. And I think our take should kind of relate to that, or a game maybe on Sunday. But we put together something pretty cool that I'll let you talk about here for our first perfect parlay, as you coined the term about 20 minutes ago.
Yeah, no, it was something before we hopped on the recording. I was like, I have an idea. But like I said on Tuesday, I wanted our bets to be more specific, maybe converted almost to a bet if people wanted to either trail us or fade us. And in this case, I want to just put it out there before we get into the segment. This is not betting advice. We are not advising you to do anything. If you want to take this information and use it, that is up to your discretion. We're just letting you know what we've decided to do and what we're going to kind of keep track of throughout the rest of the year. And that's going to start with my perfect take or perfect bet this week. And it relates to this Thursday night game because it is a banger of a Thursday night game. We haven't had this good of a matchup, at least leading up to it, since I almost feel like the season opener. But that regardless, the perfect bet this week is going to be Zay Flowers. I think he gets 6+ receptions, 80+ yards, and he scores a touchdown. So that's going to get combined with your perfect bet or perfect take, and then that will lead to our perfect parlay for the week.
Yeah, mine's pretty similar. I went, and I think both of these guys are on one of your fantasy football teams, so this is certainly something you're going to be watching. I said Ja'Marr Chase, 7 receptions, 100 yards, 2 touchdowns, because we saw 2 weeks ago what a Browns receiving core consisting of Cedric Tillman, put respect on his name, Elijah Moore, and I can't. Jerry Jeudy, my fault. Jerry Jeudy and David Njoku as well.
I was about to say, disrespecting an Alabama wide receiver.
I know that whole group there with Judy Ruggs, Waddle, and Devontae Smith and Waddle kind of left those guys in the dust there. That being said, Ja'Marr Chase, 7 receptions, 100 yards, 2 touchdowns. The Ravens secondary, and they did just trade for Trey White, who will not play in this game. We saw that confirmed today, is suspect. And so I think Burrow, who just had a monster game last week, will be lighting them up a little bit. Originally, before we had the parlay idea, my take was going to be to take the over, which is 52.5. I think both of these teams might score 4 or more touchdowns just because we've got 2 high-powered offenses and 2 suspect at best defenses, especially pass defenses. I think the only thing you could take away positively on either of these 2 teams is that Trey Hendrickson is a very good edge rusher. I think he currently is 2nd in sacks. He had a monster game last week, but Lamar Jackson's going to be hard to sack. He's a different animal than Gardner Minshew or Ritter or whoever they had in with the Raiders. So if all this comes to play and our parlay comes true, it'll prove that this is going to be an offensive game or a high-powered offensive matchup. And I, for one, can't wait to watch. You're right. Thursday Night Football has been not a banger, and I know bangers. It has not been a banger since I don't even think the first week was super good.
I
Like
thought
going back to
Ravens
last,
Chiefs was
it
good
was
a season opener.
okay, but like it's not been like a classic game. Like even the Monday night game, I thought was a pretty good game at the end. I don't think we've seen like a nail biter like that all year or for quite some time on Thursday Night Football. So I'm looking forward to this one. Hopefully, it doesn't let us down.
Yeah, I mean, their first matchup, again, it was in Cincinnati, did go to overtime, and I'd love to see that. Jamar Chase had 2 touchdowns that game. You're banking on that again here. For me, Zay Flowers has been unstoppable the past couple of weeks. I think he's averaged like 6 receptions a game and about like 110 yards. So he's been on fire. Jamar Chase has the ability to go off, and with T. Higgins out, this seems like the perfect parlay, and we're going to see if it hits. Should be a barn burner of the night. We're excited to watch it. And for all of those who are tuning in, tune in again next week. We will be breaking down all of the games from this week, talking about the Panthers' trip to Germany and any other news that may come out between now and then. So until then, follow us on Purrfect Takes on Twitter, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your content, we'll be there. And we'll catch you guys next week.